Every Saturday, like clockwork, Elena and her 5-year-old daughter Lila would stroll hand in hand down the street to their favorite little cafe on the corner. It wasn't fancy or flashy, but it had just the right cozy feeling they both loved. A place where the staff knew their names, where the smell of fresh coffee and warm pastries wrapped around them the second they walked in. It had become their special tradition, a tiny island of peace after the long, hectic weeks. Elena would sip her coffee, catching up on emails or reading a book, while Lila doodled away in a spiral notebook she carried everywhere. It was simple, predictable, safe. Until one afternoon when the world as Elena knew it shifted in the most unexpected way. They were halfway through their sandwiches when it happened. Lila, who had been deeply focused on sketching a giraffe in a top hat, suddenly stopped mid-doodle. Elena barely noticed at first, lost in thought as she scrolled through her phone. But then Lila tugged on her sleeve with an urgency that made Elena look up. Her daughter's big brown eyes, so full of earnestness, locked onto hers. Lila pointed across the cafe with a tiny, chubby finger and said something so simple, so innocent, that it knocked the breath right out of Elena's chest. She said that the waiter looked just like Daddy. Elena turned to follow Lila's gaze, the world around her blurring slightly at the edges. And there he was. A man standing near the counter, handing an order to the barista. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs. The man had the same strong build, the same deep brown skin that she used to trace with her fingers on lazy Sunday mornings. He even had a scar just below his left ear, a small, thin line she remembered all too well from the night Daniel had fallen during a college football game. For a moment, she thought her mind must be playing cruel tricks on her. After all, Daniel had been gone for 2 years. They had mourned him, buried him, moved forward, or at least tried. But it wasn't just the way he looked. When he spoke, laughing lightly at something the barista said, Elena heard his voice, low and warm, familiar in a way that made her stomach twist. She felt dizzy, overwhelmed by a tidal wave of emotions she wasn't prepared for. Grabbing her purse with shaking hands, she rose from the table and made her way toward him, Lila trailing behind. Her mind raced with 1,000 questions, none of them forming coherent thoughts. When she finally reached him, words caught in her throat. She stared at him, waiting, hoping for some sign of recognition. The man turned toward her, offering a polite, puzzled smile. When Elena asked, stumbled, really, whether they knew each other, he simply shook his head. Said she must be mistaken. Claimed he was new in town, just picking up extra shifts until he figured things out. His voice was calm, casual, like this was nothing more than an awkward case of mistaken identity. Elena wanted to believe him, wanted to tell herself that grief was playing tricks on her mind. But deep down, she knew. Feeling the walls closing in, Elena grabbed Lila's hand and left the cafe without another word. The fresh spring air hit her like a slap, and she kept walking, barely seeing where she was going. Lila, bless her sweet little heart, simply skipped along beside her, unaware of the silent war raging inside her mother's mind. Elena didn't know what she had just witnessed. She didn't know what it meant. All she knew was that the past she thought she had buried wasn't finished with her yet. And neither, it seemed, was Daniel. The next morning, Elena woke up feeling like she had dreamed the entire encounter, but the unease gnawed at her too persistently to ignore. She kept replaying every moment at the cafe, every glimpse of the man's face, the way he carried himself, the faint lilt in his voice. It wasn't just a resemblance. It was him. She knew it deep in her bones, the way you know your own reflection. She couldn't brush it off like he had suggested. She couldn't convince herself it had been some random coincidence. Not when the memory of Daniel was still stitched so tightly into every corner of her heart. Sitting at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee she had forgotten to drink, Elena stared blankly out the window while Lila colored at the counter, humming to herself. She thought about calling someone, her sister, maybe, or her best friend, but the words felt too heavy, too impossible to explain. So she decided to go back to the cafe. She needed answers. Proof. Anything to ground her spinning mind. Later that afternoon, after dropping Lila off with her parents under the excuse of needing to run some errands, Elena made her way back to the cafe. Her heart pounded with every step closer, her stomach tight with a mixture of hope and fear. She half expected to see him again, wiping down tables or chatting with customers. Maybe this time she could get him alone, Get him to admit the truth. Maybe he had panicked yesterday. Maybe today would be different. But as she stepped through the door, the familiar bell chiming above her head, she immediately sensed something was off. The place was buzzing with its usual low hum of voices and clinking silverware, but the man, her Daniel, was nowhere to be seen. She scanned every corner, even ducked her head around the back where the employees usually congregated, but he wasn't there. Trying to steady her voice, Elena approached the young woman behind the counter. She asked about the man from the day before, describing him carefully, leaving out her personal connection but giving enough detail that it would be impossible not to recognize him. The woman's brow furrowed, genuinely confused. She called over another employee, then a third. None of them knew who Elena was talking about. They insisted their regular staff had been working all weekend, and no one new had been hired or even helped out temporarily. Not willing to give up so easily, Elena asked to speak to the manager. She waited, feeling the eyes of curious patrons flick toward her and then politely away. When the manager arrived, a balding man with kind eyes, she repeated her description. Again, she was met with polite confusion and firm denial. He even pulled up the employee schedule on a tablet to show her. There was no record of anyone resembling her description working there, even for a day. Feeling a cold sweat break out across her back, Elena pressed further, asking about security footage. Surely if she had seen him, the cameras would back her up. The manager agreed to check, sympathetic now but clearly thinking she might be mistaken. Together, they scrolled through the previous day's feed. Elena watched the grainy black and white footage with mounting dread. There she was, sitting with Lila. There was the barista, the other waiter she remembered. But no sign of him. No man handing an order over the counter. No familiar face brushing past tables. It was as if he had been wiped from existence. Elena left the cafe feeling even more unsteady than when she had arrived. Her mind battled between logic and instinct. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe the grief, still buried deep despite her best efforts, was clawing its way back to the surface and playing cruel tricks on her. Maybe she had imagined it all. But when she picked Lila up from her parents' house later that evening, her daughter bounded over to her, clutching her drawing from the cafe. It was a simple sketch, a tall man with brown skin and a silly smile, holding hands with a little girl in pigtails. "Mommy, did Daddy see my giraffe?" Lila asked without hesitation, her voice light and hopeful. Elena felt her throat close up. Whatever the truth was, she hadn't been the only one who saw him. And that, more than anything, told her she wasn't crazy. Something was happening. Something she couldn't explain yet. And whatever it was only just beginning. The days that followed felt heavier, slower, as if Elena were moving through thick fog. Everywhere she went, she carried the weight of that afternoon at the cafe. She kept searching for ways to explain it away, kept trying to find some thread of reason she could cling to, but nothing made sense. Lila had seen him. She had seen him. And yet, there was nothing left behind to prove it. It gnawed at her endlessly, especially during the long quiet stretches when Lila was asleep and the house was too still. On the third day, unable to bear the restless, churning feeling any longer, Elena decided to go back to the cafe one more time. Maybe there had been a mistake. Maybe someone would remember something now. Maybe he would be there again, and she could have another chance to face him properly. She tucked Lila into the care of her parents once more and drove back to the small cafe with a heart full of shaky hope. But when she arrived, it was all the same. Warm smells drifting from the kitchen, the baristas chatting behind the counter, customers sipping coffee and tapping away on laptops. Everything looked normal. Everything looked maddeningly ordinary. The manager remembered her, greeted her with a kind, slightly worried smile. He asked if she was doing okay. She asked again about the man, about the security footage. This time, she pressed harder. Had they reviewed everything? Had they checked outside cameras? Had they spoken to the delivery drivers or anyone who might have seen something strange? The manager was patient, even compassionate, but he had nothing new to offer. No one had seen anyone fitting that description. No new hires, no visitors helping out, nothing unusual captured on the security feeds. He even walked Elena through the delivery logs, which showed no surprise shipments, no substitute drivers. Out of desperation, Elena offered to speak to other regulars at the cafe. Maybe someone else had noticed him. Maybe someone else had seen what she and Lila had seen. The manager gave her a hesitant nod, and she spent the better part of an hour awkwardly approaching strangers, asking if they remembered seeing a waiter who didn't quite fit. Most people smiled politely and said no. A few looked at her like they felt sorry for her, like they thought she was another tired widow trying to find her husband's face in every crowd. By the time she slid back into her car, Elena felt like a balloon that had been pricked and was now slowly deflating. She sat there gripping the steering wheel, forehead resting against her hands, trying not to cry. It would be so much easier to believe she was just seeing things. So much easier to accept that she was grieving in a new, unexpected way. But every instinct she had screamed otherwise. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't grief playing tricks. Something real had happened. That night, after putting Lila to bed, Elena pulled out the old wooden box she kept tucked in the closet, the one filled with Daniel's things. Photographs, his college ring, a few of his favorite books, a worn-out hoodie she had never been able to throw away. She sat on the floor flipping through memories until her fingers trembled. She needed something solid to hold onto, something that could either confirm or deny the impossible thoughts swirling in her mind. Lila's drawing from the cafe lay on the coffee table. Elena picked it up, tracing the simple lines her daughter had made. The man in the picture wasn't just anyone. Lila had drawn the scar too, a small slash under the ear, just like Daniel's. She hadn't seen old photographs recently. She hadn't been coached. It was pure, unfiltered recognition from a little girl who still loved and missed her father. The realization hit Elena hard. If there was no evidence at the cafe, if there was no trace in the records, then it wasn't because they had imagined it. It was because someone didn't want there to be evidence. Someone had taken careful steps to make sure nothing remained. Her mind raced, heart hammering painfully in her chest. If Daniel had been alive, if he had come back even for a brief moment, then the question wasn't whether she had seen him. The real question was why he was hiding, and whether he would come back again. Because deep down, Elena knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Elena had always been the practical one, the planner. She kept neat folders for taxes, warranties, insurance. After Daniel's death, she had boxed up everything that reminded her of the life they had shared, storing it away in the attic, too painful to sort through but too precious to throw away. Now, standing in the dusty space under the slanted roof, she realized she needed to dig into that past if she was ever going to find answers. She pulled down the heavy boxes one by one, sneezing as the dust filled the air, feeling the ache in her arms as she set them on the floor. For hours she sifted through the pieces of her old life. There were birthday cards, receipts from vacations, little notes Daniel used to leave in her coat pocket just to make her smile. It was bittersweet, flipping through it all, feeling the love that once filled their home like sunlight. Part of her wanted to stop, to let the past stay buried where it had been for 2 long years. But something stronger pushed her forward. She had to know the truth. Near the bottom of one battered box, tucked between old photo albums and a set of battered maps from their road trips, she found something strange. A car rental receipt. It was nothing remarkable at first glance, just a standard printed form with Daniel's name, signature, and the name of a rental agency she didn't immediately recognize. But when she looked closer, her heart almost stopped. The date was 2 days after Daniel's supposed accident. 2 days after they said he had died in that fiery wreck on the interstate. Her hands shaking, Elena read over the details again and again. The receipt didn't just confirm the rental. It noted that the car had been returned in perfect condition. No signs of a crash. No damage. And the signature at the bottom was unmistakably Daniel's, right down to the little flourish he always added to the letter C in coal. For a long time, Elena just sat there on the attic floor, the paper fluttering slightly in her trembling hands. If this was real, and everything inside her told her it was, then it meant Daniel hadn't died when everyone thought he had. It meant he had been alive, walking around, renting cars, building a new life while she and Lila mourned him. Determined to push past the swirling emotions, Elena pulled out her laptop and searched for the rental agency. It was still in business, a small local chain with a few offices scattered across the state. She called the number listed on the receipt, her fingers tapping nervously on the desk as the phone rang. A cheerful woman answered. Elena explained, as casually as she could manage, that she had found an old receipt under Daniel Cole's name and was just trying to confirm some information for a family project. There was a pause on the other end, the clicking of keys, and then the woman returned. Yes, they had records of that rental. Yes, the car had been checked out and returned without incident. Yes, it had been signed for by Daniel Cole himself. Elena thanked her and hung up, her mind reeling. There it was. Hard proof. Daniel had survived whatever had happened that night on the highway. But he hadn't come home. He hadn't called. He hadn't let her or Lila know he was alive. Instead, he had disappeared, leaving them to grieve a loss that wasn't even real. Elena sat back in her chair, feeling the full weight of the revelation settle into her chest. It was a betrayal she hadn't even known she needed to be angry about until now. But anger was tangled up with something else too, something she hated to admit. Relief. If Daniel was alive, then maybe, just maybe, there was a way to find him. Maybe she could understand why he had done this. Maybe there was still a part of their story left to be written. Clutching the receipt tightly in her hand, Elena made herself a promise. She was done waiting for answers to come to her. It was time to go looking for them. And this scrap of paper from the past was the first real clue pointing the way. Elena had never imagined she would be the kind of person to hire a private investigator. It sounded like something out of a crime novel, not real life. But real life, she was learning fast, had a way of twisting into stories you could never predict. After sitting up all night staring at the rental receipt and thinking about Lila's wide-eyed hopefulness, she knew she couldn't do this alone. She needed help. She needed someone who could find the truth hiding in the shadows where she couldn't reach. The next morning, after dropping Lila off at preschool, Elena sat in her car and searched on her phone for local investigators. The first few results felt wrong. Slick websites full of flashy promises and aggressive slogans. She scrolled further until she found a smaller agency tucked into the corner of town, run by a woman named Mara Donovan. There was something steady and no-nonsense about the way the site was written. No bold guarantees, just a quiet confidence that made Elena feel, for the first time in days, a little less alone. Within an hour, she was sitting across from Mara in a tiny office that smelled faintly of old books and coffee. Mara was in her late 40s, dressed in jeans and a worn leather jacket, her gray-streaked hair pulled back into a low ponytail. She listened without interrupting as Elena told her everything. The cafe encounter, the disappearing waiter, the missing evidence, the rental receipt. Mara didn't scoff or raise an eyebrow. She just nodded, took notes, and when Elena finally ran out of words, she leaned back and said simply, "Let's find out what's real." It only took 3 days. 3 long, agonizing days where Elena checked her phone every 5 minutes and jumped every time a new email arrived. 3 days where she swung wildly between hope and despair, between steeling herself for heartbreak and imagining impossible reunions. And then, on the 3rd afternoon, her phone buzzed with a text from Mara. "Found him. Call me." Elena's hands were shaking so badly she had to dial twice before she got the number right. Mara answered immediately, her voice calm, professional, but with a faint undercurrent of excitement. She had tracked Daniel, or rather Eli Marsh, the name he was using now, to a small town called Ogden, Utah. He worked odd jobs for cash, stayed under the radar, lived in a modest rental house at the edge of town. No phone. No digital footprint. No social media. It was as if he had deliberately erased every trace of the man he used to be. Mara sent over a few photos she had managed to capture discreetly. Elena opened them with trembling fingers. There he was. Standing in front of a hardware store, loading lumber into the back of an old pickup truck. Sitting on the porch of a small, weathered house, sipping from a coffee mug. Laughing with a neighbor over a crooked fence. It was him. Older, maybe a little thinner, but unmistakably Daniel. What caught Elena's breath, though, wasn't just seeing his face again. It was the flash of gold on his left hand. He was still wearing his wedding ring. She stared at that photo for a long time, her emotions a tangled mess she couldn't begin to sort through. Relief that he was alive. Anger that he had abandoned them. Fear of what she would find if she went to him. And underneath it all, a small, fierce flame of hope she didn't know how to extinguish. Mara's voice broke through her swirling thoughts. "You need to be prepared," she said gently. "He might not be the man you remember. Disappearing changes a person." Elena nodded, even though Mara couldn't see her. She knew. She wasn't naive enough to think this would be simple. But she also knew she had to go. For herself. For Lila. For all the unanswered questions that had haunted them for far too long. She thanked Mara, promised to stay in touch, and sat there for a long moment staring at the address Mara had texted her. It felt like a lifeline and a warning all at once. Finally, with a deep, shaky breath, she started the car and pointed it west. Toward Ogden. Toward the truth. Toward a man she had loved and lost and somehow found again. The drive to Ogden felt endless. Elena had rehearsed what she would say 100 times, but as the miles stretched on and the mountains grew closer, the words kept slipping away. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. No matter how many times she told herself to stay calm, 1,000 emotions churned inside her. Grief, anger, fear, hope. Every mile closer to him felt like she was pulling back the bandage on an old wound she had barely survived the first time. When she finally pulled onto the quiet street Mara had given her, she almost didn't recognize the man sitting on the front steps of the small blue house. Daniel, no Eli as he now called himself, looked older, more weathered. His shoulders seemed heavier, like he carried an invisible weight he couldn't set down. But it was him. Her Daniel. For a long moment, she just sat there, watching him sip from a chipped coffee mug, his eyes scanning the street without really seeing anything. It hit her then how much she had missed that simple sight. How much she had missed him being real and breathing somewhere under the same sky. But the ache of abandonment was stronger. She hadn't come all this way to weep or to fall into his arms. She needed answers. Heart hammering, Elena got out of the car and walked toward him. He didn't notice her until she was nearly at the foot of the steps. When he looked up and met her gaze, the coffee mug slipped from his hand and shattered on the ground. His face went pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but Elena beat him to it. Without thinking, she slapped him. Not hard enough to truly hurt, but enough to make the sting match the rage burning inside her chest. The sound cracked through the still afternoon air. Daniel flinched, but he didn't move away. He just looked at her with wide, broken eyes, like he couldn't believe she was standing there. Elena's voice shook as she spoke. "You let us think you were dead. You let Lila cry for you every night. You let me bury an empty coffin." Daniel dragged a hand down his face, sinking onto the top step like his legs couldn't hold him up anymore. He didn't argue. He didn't deny it. He just started talking, and once he started, the words poured out like a dam had broken inside him. He told her about the trip to Vegas. About falling into the wrong crowd, getting into something over his head with people he couldn't escape. About how the car accident was real. He had been run off the road, barely made it out of the wreckage before it caught fire. He said he watched from the trees as the flames consumed everything, realizing in that horrifying moment that the people after him would never stop if they knew he had survived. Disappearing had been the only way to protect Elena and Lila, he said. If they thought he was dead, they would be safe. Elena listened, arms crossed tight over her chest, trying to absorb it all. Part of her understood. Part of her wanted to scream. "You should have trusted me," she said, her voice raw. "We could have faced it together. You didn't have to leave us alone." Daniel's eyes filled with tears he didn't bother to hide. "I watched you," he said. "I kept my distance, but I had to know you were okay. I thought staying away was the only way to keep you safe." "Safe," Elena repeated in her mind. As if safety had been enough to fill the hole he left behind. As if knowing he was alive from a distance could have been a substitute for Lila having her father and Elena having the man she loved beside her. She didn't know if she could ever forgive him. She didn't know if trust, once shattered so completely, could be pieced back together. But looking at him now, so human, so flawed, she realized that despite everything, some part of her still cared. Maybe not in the same way. Maybe not with the same blind faith. But it was there, stubborn and aching and real. She turned to leave without saying goodbye, needing time to think, needing air to breathe. As she walked back to her car, she heard his voice behind her, low and broken. "Tell Lila I never stopped loving her." Elena didn't turn around. She just got in the car and drove away, tears blurring the road ahead, her heart heavier and somehow lighter all at once. Back home, Elena sat in the living room long after the sun went down, listening to the soft sounds of Lila snoring upstairs. The house felt smaller somehow, too quiet after everything she had just gone through. She kept running the confrontation over and over in her mind, picking apart every word Daniel had said, every look that had passed between them. Part of her still wanted to believe there was some world where this could make sense, where love could overcome the gaping hole he had left behind. But another part of her, the part hardened by 2 years of holding it all together for Lila, knew better. Some damage couldn't be undone with apologies. The sound of Lila's feet padding down the stairs broke through her thoughts. Elena turned to see her daughter standing there in her little pajama set, rubbing her eyes and clutching her favorite stuffed giraffe. She smiled sleepily and climbed into Elena's lap without a word, settling against her the way she had since she was a baby. For a while, they just sat like that, Elena holding on to her little girl like she was the only thing keeping her anchored to the ground. "Mommy," Lila said after a long stretch of silence, "do you think Daddy saw my drawing?" Elena swallowed hard against the lump rising in her throat. She brushed Lila's hair back from her face and kissed the top of her head. "I think he saw it, sweetheart," she said softly. "I think he saw it, and it made him smile." Lila beamed, her whole face lighting up with pure, unguarded joy. She had never given up believing. Even when everyone else had tiptoed around the subject, carefully changing it when her questions got too pointed, even when Elena herself had struggled to find answers, Lila had held tight to her memories of her father like they were treasures. She still told his silly giraffe jokes at dinner. Still made birthday cards with his name on them. Still whispered good night to him before bed. It was both beautiful and heartbreaking to realize how deep her faith ran. Later that night, after Lila had drifted back to sleep, Elena sat at the kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper in front of her. She thought about everything Daniel had said. About the fear that had driven him to run. About the regret in his eyes when he talked about missing them. She didn't know what the right thing to do was. She didn't know if letting him back into their lives was even possible after the choices he had made. But she knew one thing for sure. Lila deserved to have a voice in this. She couldn't just slam the door shut without at least giving her daughter the chance to decide what she wanted. The next day, Elena took Lila out for ice cream. They sat on a park bench, the warm sun filtering through the trees, watching kids play on the jungle gym. She kept it simple, careful not to overwhelm her daughter. She told Lila that sometimes people made hard choices because they thought it would protect the ones they loved. She said that sometimes those choices hurt anyway, even when the reason seemed good at the time. Then she asked Lila if she would like to see her daddy again one day, if he promised to be safe, if he promised to be gentle and kind. Lila didn't hesitate. She nodded fiercely, her little fists tightening around her melting cone. "I miss his silly songs," she said. "I miss his hugs." Elena smiled, even as her heart ached. She didn't know what the road ahead would look like. She didn't know if Daniel could be trusted with their hearts again. But if there was even a chance that Lila could have a piece of her father back, safely, carefully, at her own pace, then Elena had to be brave enough to leave that door open just a little. She reached out and wiped a smudge of chocolate off Lila's nose. "All right, sweetheart," she said. "Maybe one day soon, we'll see if we can find a way to make that happen." And deep down, she promised herself that no matter what happened next, she would protect that beautiful belief Lila carried inside her. The kind that refused to be broken, the kind that could bring even the most lost souls back home. 3 weeks passed in a blur of everyday life. School runs, grocery shopping, laundry folded on the couch late at night. Elena found herself slipping back into the rhythm she had fought so hard to build after losing Daniel. But everything felt different now, like a thin layer of glass had been laid over her world, making every moment feel a little more fragile. Some days she managed to keep busy enough to forget, to lose herself in the noise and motion. Other days, she would catch herself staring out the window, wondering if he was out there somewhere, wondering if he was thinking about them too. It was on one of those slow, heavy afternoons that the letter arrived. It was tucked between the usual stack of bills and flyers, almost hidden, as if it didn't want to be found. Elena recognized the handwriting instantly, a familiar, slightly messy scrawl that pulled her breath right out of her chest. Her fingers trembled as she turned it over, half afraid of what she would find inside. She thought about tearing it open right there by the mailbox, but something told her this wasn't the kind of thing you read standing up. Inside the house, with Lila happily building a fort out of pillows in the living room, Elena sat down at the kitchen table and opened the envelope. The letter was written on plain lined paper, no fancy stationery, no dramatic flair. Just simple, honest words from a man who had once meant everything to her. He didn't make excuses. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He didn't try to paint himself as a hero. Instead, he thanked her for the life they had shared, for the love they had given him, and most of all, for being the kind of mother who had kept Lila's heart soft and strong. He said he understood that trust wasn't something he could ask for easily, maybe not ever. But he hoped that, in time, he might be allowed to know his daughter again, even if it was just from a distance. He didn't want to confuse her or hurt her more. He didn't want to disrupt the life Elena had fought so hard to rebuild. He just wanted to be given the chance to be present if Lila ever wanted him. Tears blurred Elena's vision as she read and reread the letter. She didn't know what she had expected. Maybe more anger, maybe empty promises. But what she found instead was something quieter, something that felt achingly real. A man broken by his choices, reaching out not to demand a place in their lives, but to offer whatever pieces of himself they were willing to accept. She sat there for a long time, the letter clutched in her hands, listening to the soft, happy sounds of Lila playing in the next room. It wasn't forgiveness she felt yet. That would take time, if it ever came at all. But she did feel a kind of peace settle over her, the first real peace she had felt in years. Later that evening, after Lila had drifted off to sleep in her blanket fort, Elena carefully folded the letter and placed it inside a small box where she kept things for Lila: birthday cards, little notes, school drawings. She didn't show it to her yet. She didn't talk about it yet. Some things, she knew, needed to unfold slowly, gently, on their own terms. One day, when the time was right, she would sit with Lila and explain. She would tell her that sometimes people get lost, even the ones who love us the most. She would tell her that sometimes love means making room for second chances, not because the past is forgotten, but because the future deserves a fighting chance. For now, she would keep the letter safe. A small, fragile bridge between what was broken and what might still be possible. Because this story, Elena realized, wasn't just about a man who had disappeared. It wasn't even just about a woman learning how to heal. It was about a little girl whose heart had never stopped believing in magic, in forgiveness, and in the kind of love that could survive even the darkest storms. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start again. Life often hands us moments that test the very core of who we are. Moments of loss, betrayal, and overwhelming uncertainty. From Elena's story, we learn that healing does not come from pretending pain never existed, but from facing it with courage and an open heart. We are reminded that trust, once broken, may take time and patience to rebuild, but second chances, when offered with sincerity, can open the door to unexpected new beginnings. Above all, Lila's unwavering belief teaches us the incredible power of hope, that even when the world feels shattered, love and forgiveness can stitch us back together piece by piece. For those of us who have weathered many seasons of life, this story is a gentle call to remember. It's never too late to hope again, to forgive carefully, and to open ourselves to the beautiful possibility of healing. If this message touched you, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. We would love to hear your stories of resilience and second chances. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the inspiring journeys we have yet to share.